The Public Policy Luncheon series has become a signature event for Commerce Lexington over these past many years. These events would not be possible without some very committed sponsors, and every year we look out there and that list grows longer and longer and longer. Their support ensures that these events makes these events a first-class, first-rate event, and we appreciate that. On the back of your program, everyone know where your program is at, is a listing of all of our sponsors, and I would ask that you just be respectful to take a minute to look at those sponsors, and whenever you need to do business, that you would strongly consider doing business with those individuals. They invest not only in Commerce Lexington, but many other events and programs throughout the city, throughout the region, and we're very grateful for that. Without that, as I said earlier, we would not have the quality events that we currently have today. We would like to thank Kentucky American Water for being our presenting sponsor of this Policy Luncheon series. I think from the very inception when we reformatted our program. And at this time, I'd like to introduce Nick Rowe, President of Kentucky American Water, to bring some remarks here at the podium. Nick.
Thank you, Bob. It's a pleasure for Kentucky American to continue to be the presenting sponsor for this public policy luncheon. And thank you, Senator, for being back. He has been with us the last couple of years in Lexington, and we really appreciate him taking time to do that. You know, after being in St. Louis for the last 4 to 5 years, it's really good to be back home in Lexington. When you're in St. Louis, you cheer for the Cardinals, but at the same time, you're pulling for the Wildcats. So when you talk basketball in Missouri, they kind of look at you like you're crazy. So it's glad to be back home here, and look forward to working with the business community and ensuring that our company continues to provide the service to this community. For those who may not be aware, Kentucky American is part of a national company, American Water, and I'll be very brief with this, but we operate facilities in about 45 states nationwide and serve about 15 million people. Of course, everybody in our organization wants to get transferred to Hawaii American, and nobody wants to go to Michigan American, so I wonder why. But in addition to our regulated business like Kentucky American, a little bit about us, we have a lot of public-private partnerships. We're managing the saltwater plant in Tampa, Florida, with a 20-year contract to provide service to a big retirement area in Tampa. We manage about 12 military bases around the country: Fort Lee, Virginia, Fort Hood, Fort Rucker, Alabama, Scott Air Force Base, to name a few. Have about 50-year contracts where the federal government has been exiting the water and wastewater business and looking for our expertise. We're also part of working to solve the water supply out in the western part of the U.S. You know, California, Nevada, that part of the country is really struggling. So we're in the process now of building a new saltwater plant right on the Pacific Ocean, turned to fresh water. So we've got our engineers and our people there solving that water supply problem out west. Our biggest challenge in the water and wastewater industries, like many communities, is infrastructure replacement. The EPA has estimated over the next 2 decades it'll take $1 trillion to address the water and wastewater needs. American Water around our states has been investing about $1.2 billion annually to address that issue. Here in Kentucky, in the last 10 years, we have put about $400 million of capital improvements into the system. We'll put about $20 million into the system this year to make sure we provide the quality service to the communities that we serve. Again, we're glad to be a part of this, and again, really look forward to hearing from the Senator. So thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Kentucky American. Gosh, you were my second chairman of the board that I got to work with after I moved here, so we're glad to have you back here and in the role that you're playing, and we do appreciate everything that Kentucky American and that your team that are here today that you do for us. Thank you. It is very much an honor for me to introduce Senator McConnell. He's Kentucky's senior senator. He's one of the most influential political leaders in the nation, now serving as the U.S. Senate Majority Leader. And in general, the thing we often tend to hear is the frustration that people have about, as we'll often hear, nothing happening in Washington. Don't lay that at his doorstep. Under his leadership, the Senate is functioning again. Rules, guidelines, order, Republicans and Democrats working together, and significant legislations coming out, as we've all witnessed with the highway bill that came out recently. All I heard from my colleagues out there was that it wasn't going to happen. It'd be another one of those kind of stay-on bills that would just be kind of renewed to go on and be a Band-Aid. Leadership. Important legislation is now moving, and we're going to hear a little bit more about some of the different items that have moved in the past year and what we expect in the year ahead. We're lucky to have someone with his experience serving in this position, representing Kentucky. He's always been a tremendous advocate for Central Kentucky in Washington, D.C., and in our over 10, I guess we're going on 12 meetings in Washington, D.C., you've always been there for us. And he doesn't always tell you what you want to hear, which is what we want to hear is what the truth is and what the facts are, and that's what's very important. And by the way, your staff is first class, and they don't always tell us what we want to hear, but they tell us what the facts are, and then we're able to be effective by tackling the real problem and not exaggerations that some people have out there. Not you, but others. When we go out there, we discuss issues of importance, and these are some of our priority issues, not all of them, but many: education and workforce development, transportation funding, energy and environment, regulations, tax reform, health care issues. And when we go and we meet on regulations, we meet with the EPA. We don't just go out there and meet with somebody who's going to tell us what we want to hear. He makes sure that we have the right people that we need to have the right conversation. And as I said before, you have an excellent staff. They can take the most complicated issues and they explain them so that we understand them and we work with them. And also they get right back to us whoever we call, so they make us feel like we're very important. So help me give a round of applause to one of our nation's top leaders, our senior senator, for a recap of the past year and a preview of the year to come, Senator Mitch McConnell.
Well, thank you very much. Happy New Year, everyone. I want to say to you, Dr. Capilouto, how proud we are of the job you're doing at UK. I think you're making a huge difference, and as a graduate of the law school, I follow what you do, and we're proud of your contribution. And I see your sidekick, Mark Birdwhistle, sitting beside you, who's being asked to come back to Frankfurt in a way, to give some advice to our new governor, who I had an opportunity to meet with this morning. And I'm not here to talk about state issues, but just to underscore that change is coming in Kentucky. Change is coming. It's been a long time coming, but change is coming. And I think you, all of you who are involved in business, know the handicaps we have had at the state level in trying to compete with states like Indiana and Tennessee, not having right to work, being one of only 7 states that don't allow public charter schools, and not having a sensible prevailing wage law driving up the cost of school construction and the like, and not having medical review panels, some kind of sensible tort reform, all have handicapped us in significant ways. Hopefully, with the ultimate change of the House and a new governor, we'll go in a different direction and make Kentucky more competitive with other states around us. Now, with regard to my job, I want to thank you all for the opportunity to serve our folks for a pretty long time. And I also want to thank my colleagues for the opportunity of being the majority leader of the Senate. Now, I said back during my campaign that I had enjoyed being the defensive coordinator, but I'd rather be the offensive coordinator. And just like in football, the fundamental difference is the defensive coordinator doesn't get to call the offensive plays. The majority leader in the Senate gets to determine what we're going to debate, what are we going to talk about, what's the agenda. And so in taking over the new majority, the first day after my reelection, I said, I'm going to rule out 2 things. no more government shutdowns, no more threatening to default on the national debt, things that rattle the economy and don't work anyway. One of my former colleagues famously said, "Never take a hostage you're not prepared to shoot." And one of my favorite old Kentucky sayings is, "There's no education in the second kick of a mule." So my side has tried those hostage-taking episodes a few times in the past. It always ends the same way. And so if you know how it's going to end, why start it in the first place? So what I said we wanted to be was a responsible, right-of-center governing majority, because I wanted the American people to think that if they linked up this new Republican House and Senate with a Republican president, it wouldn't be anything to be afraid of. It would be actually something to embrace. But alas, at the beginning of the year, that was not the situation. We had, of course, divided government. Now, divided government is not unusual. We've had divided government more often than not since World War II. It's almost as if the American people kind of like divided government. So here I was, the leader of the new majority, setting an agenda in a time of divided government with a president who, by any objective standard, is not a centrist. This is not Bill Clinton. So what should the mission be? I said, number one, we're going to end dysfunction. You heard a lot about dysfunction. Let me tell you what the definition of dysfunction is. In all of 2014, the last year under the old majority, we had 15 roll call votes on amendments in the whole year. We just ended the first session of this Congress. We had 200. 4 of the last 5 years, the Senate didn't pass a budget, which is required by law. We did that. So the era of dysfunction in the Senate is over. But now that's not nearly enough. You'd have to admit that's a pretty low crossbar to get over. Nothing to particularly brag about other than to say the era of dysfunction is over. So, in a time of divided government, what is the way to make a difference? Well, I thought it was to look for things upon which there was enough bipartisan support that were worth doing and do them. The first thing we called up was the Keystone Pipeline. The president ultimately vetoed it, but it enjoyed broad bipartisan support. And as I said, we passed a budget. We passed Trade Promotion Authority, which gives not only this president, but the next one, the opportunity to negotiate trade agreements with other countries and submit them to Congress for an up or down vote. And the argument I made, that was a really unusual situation. It was almost an out-of-body experience. I mean, here I was allied with the president against Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi. It was an interesting exercise. The argument I made to my Republican colleagues, even though it is a significant grant of authority to the president, we had given this authority to the president off and on going back to Franklin Roosevelt. And so, first of all, it wasn't a new grant of authority. And second, it was for 6 years. So it was not just for this president, but for the next one as well. We did a multi-year highway bill, which you mentioned. Now, you'd think that'd be easy. But in fact, we had done a whole bunch of short-term extensions for a very long time. And a 5-year highway bill, the last time that happened was in '98. So if you're in state government or affected by state government, you have certainty for a substantial period of time in highway construction, which is one of the biggest things state government does. One of the greatest complaints in recent years in elementary and secondary education was No Child Left Behind. Widely unpopular all the way across the country. We did a major rewrite of No Child Left Behind and actually transferred power out of Washington back to the state level. Some argue the most significant reversal of power in any area in the last quarter of a century. The president gagged a little bit on that one, but he signed it. And the reason I think he signed it is because it passed both the House and Senate by big enough majorities to where he knew his veto would be overridden. The controversial deal with Iran. It's an executive branch agreement. It's not a treaty. The President made the decision not to submit it as a treaty, obviously because he was concerned it couldn't be ratified. But there was a bipartisan feeling that we ought to have at least some opportunity to react to it. And so we have passed the Iran Nuclear Review Act. The President ultimately got his executive agreement, but we did have a chance to weigh in on it. We also passed cybersecurity, which had been stuck for a very long time. And TSCA, it's a chemical environmental bill that in that business you're very familiar with. So summing up the first year of the new majority, by any objective standard, dysfunction is over, and it's been an accomplished Congress, a significantly accomplished Congress. Now, I'd like to do more because divided government arguably is the best time to do really hard things. These were challenging, but not what I would describe as really hard. Let me give you some examples of really hard that have been tackled by divided government. Think of Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill raising the age for Social Security, which saved Social Security for a generation. Think of Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill doing the last comprehensive tax reform, which we need to do again. The last one was 30 years ago. Think of Bill Clinton and a Republican Congress doing welfare reform and actually balancing the budget for 3 years in a row. Who would have ever imagined that? Those are the big things that can sometimes be accomplished with divided government and frequently can't be accomplished unless you have divided government because the political toxicity attached to those kinds of issues make it almost impossible to deal with unless you do have divided government. So my hopes for Barack Obama had always been that he would join with us to tackle the big stuff. And the big stuff is both Medicare and Social Security are heading for a disaster. And until you adjust these popular entitlement programs to fit the demographics of America in the future, not America in the past. Remember, Social Security was set up in the 30s when the average American lived to be 61. Medicare in the 60s. Last year, I'm told, the average male lived to be 79, the average female lived to be 81. There are a whole lot of people living longer and longer and longer, and there's nothing bad about that. But if you don't adjust the eligibility to fit the demographics of the future, you know where we're headed. Comprehensive tax reform, I mentioned Reagan and Tip O'Neill doing that. We need to do it again. But we can't do it with this president because he does not agree with us about what it was about. So let me refresh your memory. The 1986 tax reform bill was agreed to on a bipartisan basis to be revenue neutral to the government. In other words, it was not to get the government more money, but to make America more competitive by trying to get the rates down. And the way you got the rates down was by using the revenue produced by the elimination of preferences, used them to buy down rates rather than to reap a harvest for the federal government. Unfortunately, the president does not believe in revenue neutrality, and so that's the first stumbling block. The second one was, to the maximum extent possible, Reagan and Tip O'Neill wanted to treat all taxpayers similarly. The president doesn't agree to that because he wants to keep the higher rates on individuals. And if you think that's appealing, the problem is most American businesses pay taxes as individuals, either S-corps or LLCs. They're not incorporated. And so they pay taxes as individuals, not as corporations. So the president said he was open to getting the corporate tax rate down because of the lack of competitiveness we have now with other countries, because our corporate tax rate now is simply not competitive. Lots of countries have lowered the corporate tax rate. The problem is, imagine the politics of having General Electric down at 28 to 30 and all their customers up at 40 because they're LLCs or S-corps. That doesn't work. So regretfully, we're not going to be able to do the kind of transformative things the country needs because our president, a very smart guy, is also very, very liberal. And so if you've noticed the last 8 years, let's just sum it up as we move here into the last year of the presidency. The president owned the Congress the first 2 years, owned it. It's 60 votes in the Senate. That's the magic number. 51 is control, is majority, 60 is control, because much of what we do requires a supermajority. The president had 60. The $1 trillion stimulus he got, Obamacare he got, Dodd-Frank he got, when he had big, big majorities. Then the American people, 2 years into the administration, took a look at all that and expressed themselves with some buyer's remorse and changed the House and made me the leader of a more consequential minority in the Senate. The president, taking a look at that, could have made a Clintonian decision, because Clinton lost both houses 2 years into his 8 years, and decided, I'm going to do business with these folks, I'm going to move to the middle. Or, and I thought that's what President Obama would do, or I can say, to heck with those guys, I got what I wanted the first 2 years, I'm going to do everything else I want to do only through regulations and executive orders. That's what he chose to do. Well, I thought maybe in 2012, when he didn't get the House back, even though he got a second term, maybe we'd see the Clintonian pivot now. Nope. Then I thought, when the Senate flipped last year, and he was confronted with an entirely Republican Congress, surely the pivot will occur now. My friends, the pivot isn't coming. The president is pursuing aggressively his agenda, executive branch only, and you're seeing it across the board. In southeast Kentucky, you see the effects of EPA rampage and the regulations against existing power plants and and new power plants. In agriculture, you see it in the waters of the U.S. regulation that potentially impacts every puddle in America. Big climate change meeting in Paris. Everybody got together saying, "Kumbaya." It has no impact at all. No enforcement mechanism, no nothing. Now, on a few occasions, the president's been slapped down. Within a week or so after the new Senate majority was elected, the president issued some immigration executive orders that he had previously said on no fewer than 5 occasions he didn't have the authority to issue. He went ahead and did it, and that's currently been stopped in the courts. The power plant initiatives that I mentioned, you'll find this interesting. The president's constitutional law professor at Harvard, the guy that taught him con law at Harvard, very, very liberal guy, thinks climate change is a serious problem, is representing the coal industry in the litigation. Why? Because the president's constitutional law professor thinks the president doesn't have the authority to do what he's doing under either the Constitution or the Clean Air Act of 1990. So we'll see what the courts decide on that, but I think it's noteworthy that somebody who shares the president's conviction about the issue finds the way in which it's being pursued as unacceptable. So to sum up, the last 6 years after the president lost the Congress is to pursue the agenda as aggressively as I can through the executive branch, pushing the envelope as far as I can. Now, the weakness of that approach is that which can be done by one person can be undone by one person. And the most conspicuous example of that is the Iran nuclear deal. So let me say a word about the foreign policy of this administration, then I'll open it up. I'll begin by quoting Jimmy Carter. I expect most of you have not heard me routinely quote Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was asked at the beginning of the summer to sum up the president's foreign policy, and this is what he said. This is almost a direct quote. He said he couldn't think of a single place in the world where we were better off now than we were before the president took office. This is Jimmy Carter on this administration's foreign policy. Now, the linchpin of that, obviously, was the Iran nuclear deal. The president obviously wanted to transform the politics of the Middle East. He has. He has. This deal has produced much of the following fallout. You've watched just in the last few days most of our Sunni Arab allies stop their current diplomatic relations with Iran by recalling the ambassador or downplaying it to a Sharjah office. The Saudis, the Emiratis, and other Sunni Arab allies not even engaging in the fiction of having relationships with Iran. The Iran deal is not only not verifiable and not likely to stop Iran's march toward a nuclear weapon, it also underscored the president's theory when it comes to the Middle East, which goes back to a big speech he made in Cairo back in 2009 to the Muslim world. And the crux of the speech was, everybody's pretty much the same, no matter what country you're from. In other words, a questioning of American exceptionalism. And second, if we all just talk to each other, things would get better. And so we had a serious discussion, his administration did, with the Iranians for years, leading to this deal. Now, during that discussion, Vladimir Putin took a look at all that and said, I think I'll take Crimea, and he did. And then he said, I think I'll encroach on eastern Ukraine, and he has. And then he said, I think I'll just put troops in Syria, and he has. And the Russians have taken advantage of the view that America is in retreat to re-engage in the Middle East in a way that they hadn't been since they got kicked out of Egypt by Anwar Sadat years ago. So, we have the rise of ISIS, and I would not, you'll be pleased to know, blame that on Barack Obama. But I will say this. Had the president not made the decision to leave Iraq entirely, there would be no ISIS in Iraq. Probably would be in Syria, but not in Iraq. And he rejected the model that has worked so well for us over the last 70, 80 years. At the end of the war in Europe, did we leave Germany? No. At the end of the war in Japan, did we leave Japan? No. Did we leave Korea? No. No. And it's a model that worked pretty well. In fact, we're still there. Now, still being there doesn't mean people are getting shot. We're not losing soldiers routinely in Germany or Japan or Korea. But it gives a country in the wake of an end of a conflict in which we have a clear interest, an opportunity to develop some degree of normalcy. Korea is a conspicuous success story. When old veterans of the Korean War come in to see me from time to time, I always say, you ought to be proud. When the Korean War ended in 1953, everybody thought it was a failure. Korea in 1953, South Korea was a military dictatorship, a basket case economically, a foreign aid recipient, and a few years later, Peace Corps volunteers were in there from the United States. Today, let's take a look at South Korea. A vibrant democracy with a female president. The 13th largest economy in the world. Their own foreign aid program and their own Peace Corps. If ever there was an example of a final successful conclusion to a conflict, Korea is a perfect example. And look at Japan and Germany today. And the stability made possible by residual force made that happen. So the president's got one more opportunity here not to blow it, and that's the decision in Afghanistan. The military has been arguing for a minimal force of about 10,000 to be left behind in Afghanistan for two purposes: ongoing training of the Afghan National Army and counterterrorism. You can see that related to the decision previously made and I hope altered, that things are getting difficult in Afghanistan again, because they think the clock is ticking and we're on the way out. So I'm hopeful the president will not replicate the Iraq decision in Afghanistan, and he's still got time to not make that mistake twice. So what's the message when it comes to foreign policy? I hope you don't think I'm thinking we ought to send in the troops every time there's a skirmish. But let me tell you, passivity and withdrawal does not work. Nothing happens without American leadership. Nothing. And so what we need to do now, and it's still time for the president to do it, and I hope he does, but if not, the next president needs to do it, is to come up with a game plan to take out ISIL. And the game plan at least would include the following components. America comes up with a plan. America provides the air power. America provides special operations. And the president should say that to the Saudis, we need this many troops from you. And to the Jordanians, we need this many troops from you. And to the Emiratis, we need this many troops from you. And to the Egyptians, we need this many troops from you. Sound familiar? That's what George Bush 41 did when he kicked the Iraq army under Saddam Hussein out of Kuwait back in 1991. It's hard work getting everybody to participate, and it's particularly hard work getting people to fight on the ground, because that's where the casualties occur, but you can't beat ISIL from the air. And I'm not advocating refighting the Iraq war, but they have to be defeated, because they're not just a threat over there, they're a threat here. They're a threat here. Lone wolf attacks like we saw in San Bernardino. Very hard to stop, but they're only going to get worse if they're feeling no pressure at all in their own backyard. So, obviously I'm not very happy with the last 7 years, and we're going to get to decide later this year whether America wants to go in a different direction. I don't know who the nominee is going to be, but let me tell you what nominee needs to be like if you want to win. We all know where Kentucky's going to be this November. We all know where New York's going to be this November. There are 9 or 10 states that are going to determine who the president is. You all are familiar with red, right? Red is Republican. Blue is Democrat. There are 9 or 10 purple states who are going to determine who sits in the White House. These are states that can vote either way. New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Wisconsin, Iowa, Nevada, Colorado, Virginia, and Florida. What do all those states have in common? The president carried them twice. What other president carried almost all of them twice? George W. Bush. What did they both do? They won. So if you want to win, you have to be able to have a nominee who can appeal to an electorate that's not terribly one way or the other, that is kind of up for grabs. And so obviously what I'm hoping is that when all of this finally ends, whenever that is, that we end up with a nominee who could actually get sworn in and be president. Because as I've just outlined for you, the presidency is a very important job in our system. Congress has its responsibilities, but as this president has demonstrated, there's a whole lot the president can do on his own, for better or for worse. And so the stakes couldn't be bigger, and I, like you, watching it all with great interest. So with that, why don't I take a few questions here and see where you all would like to go. Judy?
What about Israel?
Well, the question was Israel. They've got a really good army, and really tough customers, and you think we have challenges, how'd you like to be in their neighborhood? I mean, they've got a vibrant democracy, as you all know. They have, after experimenting with European socialism in the early history of Israel and realizing the European model maybe wasn't that good, they've become more like us in terms of their free enterprise system. And of course, we are their strongest ally. I think they're going to be okay. They were very unhappy about the Iran nuclear deal with good reason. And they're going to be asking for additional military assistance in the wake of that, which I'm going to support, and I think others will. They're going to be okay. It's just a struggle. You know, every week is a struggle. There are openings among our Sunni Arab allies, even though they don't say it publicly yet. There are good relations between at least two countries and Israel, both Sunni countries, Jordan and Egypt, and sort of back channel, unofficial, good relations with some of the other Sunni Arab countries. Of course, they have no relations with Iran or Syria or Lebanon, which is basically run by the Shiites now. And but I think they're going to be okay, but it's always a struggle.
Senator, thank you for coming. Left.
Yeah.
Way in the back. I believe the president had mentioned TPP was one of his priorities this coming year, and I'm concerned that they had also mentioned as part of that deal that they were not real in favor of international export of tobacco to those expanding markets out there. And with domestic consumption declining, which is a good thing, it seems like it would be in a good interest of states like Kentucky and some of the other agricultural states if there was a better presence in the international markets as we transition through this period, to maintain the markets for our farmers.
Yeah, let me. I think all of you know this, but it bears repeating. The difference between TPA and TPP. TPA is a process, Trade Promotion Authority, a process under which the president can negotiate a deal, send it up to Congress where it's voted on up or down without amendment. That was what I was helping the president with. What you're talking about is the TPP, the actual deal, which they finalized with a number of countries, including Japan and Vietnam and Malaysia. I share your concerns about it. I have not said I was going to support TPP. I haven't said one way or the other. But I will say I was disappointed in what they finally negotiated. You mentioned one of the issues, the disparate treatment of tobacco exports. They also, in my view, had a terrible provision on pharmaceuticals. The reason we dominate the pharmaceutical market, at least we used to, in the world, is that we protect the patent for a period of time, because as most of you know, to bring a new drug to market frequently requires an enormous investment up front. And then if you don't protect that investment for a period of time, you can't recover what you've invested in order to bring the new drug to market. In this agreement, they basically cut the 12-year period down to 5. And all the countries that are not developing these drugs said, oh, this is great, we're going to get cheaper drugs quicker. Well, maybe you will, or maybe they won't be done at all. And so I was not happy with the treatment of tobacco or the treatment of pharmaceuticals, and I really haven't decided how I'm going to vote on it. Now, let's assume it's not approved before the president leaves office. It's still out there. the next administration can continue to talk about it, continue to try to modify it, and send it up, because TPA, the authority I'm talking about, is for 6 years. So if this agreement ends up not being acceptable, it's time to fix it. Either this president can fix it or the next one could. So I haven't decided what I'm going to do. My advice to the president privately, and I said it publicly as well, is I wouldn't send it up in the middle of this election, because Hillary Clinton's against it. That's the Democratic nominee. And a bunch of the Republican likely nominees are against it too. You want to get it ratified? Probably this is not the best time to send it up. Just a statement of the obvious. Yes, ma'am. Are you talking about Medicare or Medicaid? Medicare. Care. Mm-hmm.
Typically $200 a day, and an adult day center is $65 to $70 a day in this area. If Medicare would pay for recovery in a nursing home, not only would it be less, in an adult day center rather than a nursing home, it would be much less expensive and higher quality. Because, as we know, research shows that recovery is much better if someone's in their own home, so they could spend the day in the adult day center and then go to their own home, where they may or may not need care. For example, my father had a CABG, heart surgery, and fortunately my stepmother was able to care for him in the home, but if it wasn't for her, he would have had to stay in a nursing home. Mm-hmm. And Medicare paid for a nurse to come into their home to do wound care and so forth, but an adult day center could do the same for people that don't have someone at home.
Thank you. I don't know the answer off the top of my head to what the cost of that kind of adjustment would be, but we're revisiting those kinds of issues all the time. Sometimes CMS can do it administratively. Sometimes it requires statute. Off the top of my head, I don't have any idea what the cost impact, if any, would be of that kind of change. Right. Okay, well, look, thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm going to get back by the door, hopefully see some of you on the way out. Thanks a lot for the opportunity to be here.